modules that we're going to go through, and the most important module will really be Cathy's presentation on how to identify property. One of the things that is important in investor training is to make sure that you're using your time efficiently, and what's the most efficient use of your time? Usually it's on listing business development and increasing your listing business. And that's what's great about a properly trained investor agent, is that 90% of your results will contribute to enhanced listing business, because most people, most sellers, they would rather have full market value for their home, and they're given a choice on a cash buyer, cash offer right now versus putting it on the market in the MLS for full market value. So keep in mind, out of all the things that you learn at investor training and the time that you spend on enhancing your investor business and working on your skills, and most of the value goes back to listing business development. And it makes you really a more powerful listing agent when you can give them a choice at that listing presentation of a cash as is offer or full market value. 2 net sheets to where they have all the information in front of them, the repair estimates, where they can make an informed decision on the spot. Back when I was an agent and my listing specialist, that's how she was trained. I would buy and sell properties sight unseen. And she had delegated authority to do that on my behalf. Now, you guys don't have the experience to do that, but I want you to be empowered with the same tools and the same resources that we used years ago to do that. That's a little bit different market at that point, but you can still become a lot more powerful when you have those tools at your disposal. But a big part of that is the tips and tricks to finding those properties, and that's where Cathy's presentation goes in. So the first module, I want to try to keep each class no more than about 20 minutes. And the first one will go over our Waller Group investor presentation and how the Waller Group Investor Services works. So you have just an overview. 20 minutes is just enough to give you a bit of an overview on that. And then you'll want to pepper in some of that on how you find your inventory. So you'll want to pepper in some of the things that Cathy has to say in her presentation on how you find these properties that are off the MLS, that are off the market, because that's what every investor is curious about. They can go on Zillow or online, find these others, but it's that off-market inventory that perks their ears up. So knowing how to sell that is important. The other thing that we're going to focus on all of these presentations is really most of it on sales. Once you develop the lead and once you develop the listing or the listing lead, then we can help you and we can coach you through the mechanics and the technicalities through. So we're not going to spend very much time on technicalities or some of the problems that come up, because there are a lot of complexities to this as you're going through the transaction. So it's going to be mostly based around sales. You want to give kind of an overview on your training?
Well, basically what I'm going to show you is the tools that you need when you're out in the field, when you're out looking at properties. I'm going to tell you what kind of properties to look for, who to target, and what kind of neighborhoods you should be focusing in on, or what I do, so.
And before we get started, let me get just kind of a survey in the group. Tell me some questions that you have, what you wanted to get out of this and where you see the most opportunity for yourself in this training.
Well, I'm actually working on a deal right now that I have Cathy was actually working with me to try to get it sold. We couldn't make it work, so I went ahead and listed it on the market. I have multiple offers on it now. One offer is a cash offer, the other 2 are contingent financing. So I guess what I would like to get covered is, with my personal property that I have right now, is what are some of the things that, I guess I'm going to treat it like a convention. It's a conventional, both of them are conventional buyers. So does it make better sense for me just to push it, the cash offer, because he wants my opinion, and I haven't dealt a lot with investor properties. So I don't know if I'm going to get hung up on the financing part of it. So I'm a little.
Well, the problem with that house is that it's.
So let's not talk about specific situations. Keep it.
Just financing in general when it comes to
investment
properties.
Yeah.
Like, what are some of the things that could be deal breakers? I guess?
Right.
Well, the repairs are going to be the deal breaker on these properties, because the banks are going to want to see how much the repairs are, and then they're gonna wanna see that much in reserves and everything else like that. And a lot of times the repairs that a lender goes and looks at will be a lot higher than what an investor can get them done for. And, you know, it could be a difference between 28,000 and 38,000, you know, that $10,000 could really blow the deal. So I would go cash and get out.
Okay, because these financing companies are not the norm like Bank of America, the traditional ones. It's more like a private lender,
So hard money financing versus cash versus traditional mortgages. That's a great observation. That's something we'll cover in the training. Any other questions you guys can think of? Yes.
Should you find your cash buyer first or buy the deal first?
Okay, great question. Should you find the property first or should you find your buyer first? Okay, so one of the things that I'm thinking about is so much of this goes back to traditional real estate, you know, as far as prospecting and where do you spend your time and time management and listing business development. And so we know to find the listings, to find the properties, you know, what is it that every seller wants? A buyer. So as long as you have a buyer, and that's where as the brokerage being a buyer, I've bought properties in the past. Cathy works with hundreds of investors that are looking to buy properties. So you guys don't need more buyers. You already have plenty of buyers. That's not the issue in this market. So anytime you have a prospect, a listing prospect, then the buyers are never the problem. It's just a matter of how do we expose this to the buyers to get you the highest and the best use and the most amount of money for this property in the shortest amount of time, just like any other listing presentation. Okay, so we'll go into.
The whole game is controlling the deal, getting control of the deal. That's where you have the advantage.
Right.
You control that.
You control the listing, you control the deal in this market. So that's the other thing we're going to talk about is what are some, based on this market and this environment that we're in right now, what are tips and tricks to properly recommend and make a good consultation to your seller. Okay, so first we're going to go through, I emailed you guys these things earlier, but our Waller Group investor presentation overview. So this is a PowerPoint presentation. This was built for passive investors. So who knows the difference between passive investors and active investors? Okay, so these are some things that are real important to know is what is a passive investor, what is an active investor, and then what type of properties are they looking for? A fix and flip or a buy and hold? You'll find active and passive investors in each of those two categories, a buy and hold and a fix and flip investment. So the Waller Group Investor Services, what we usually look for historically have been buy and hold because we want to add units to our property management company, and you make referral fees off of referring those to the property management. In this market, you can also make just as much, if not more money on a fix and flip. So knowing the difference and asking them up front what they're looking for and what their level of involvement in that transaction is very important. So let's first start with a buy and hold investor. This is someone that's looking at usually a 5-year to 30-year investment horizon. So they're looking for things that they want to know what is that property, how is it going to appreciate, how much will the property appreciate a year? So you need to know, based on the last 2 years, what's the average appreciation in your market that they're looking. One of the things that's really important to understand is that most investor-driven markets that are price points, they're price points that are about 200 or 220,000. Well, we all know those are the price points that are appreciating faster than any other prices. Look at all the appreciation in Mesquite and Garland and Oak Cliff. Some of these markets historically they've been 60, 80, $120,000. Now moving up to $150, $180,000. So those are things that you need to know how to coach and how to consult with your investors on price appreciation. When they read the Dallas News and they see that it's 12% a year, yeah, across the board when you look at all of the sales, but the sales that are at the price points that are under about 220,000, those properties have appreciated, some of them at 20, 25% just in the last year, especially in the better school districts in Collin County. And school district schools are real important also to an investor that's a buy and hold investor that's looking at property appreciation, because you have to look at what are the expenses that these buy and hold investors have. Property management is one expense, and we charge an 8% management fee on the units that come into property management, so that's a little bit less than most of the competition. The biggest competitor charges 10%, so that gives them an advantage off the top. The other thing is the lease renewal rates. You know, what percentage of the people are moving out each year? Because when they have to pay a month's worth of rent up front to release that property, then that's another expense that they have. So our lease renewal rates run at about 70%. That's about market average right now. So for that same tenant to stay in the house 70% of the time the next year, that reduces their expenses a lot on that property. So, and that tenants stay longer in better school districts. So that's why the homes in better school districts generally have higher appreciation and better resale. So this presentation, this overview is really geared more towards someone that's not as familiar with Texas. So this is someone that's looking at a financial investment. They want to earn, 5 to 8% on their money. Maybe they're an IRA investor and they're looking at investments. So this is a very high level overview presentation. Most of the time, the people that you're going to probably be working with are not people that are on the West Coast, or not people that are physicians that are in other markets that are passive investors. You're probably more than likely going to be working with people that are past clients that you've worked with in the past that are interested in learning about investment properties or how they can make better use of their money. And you being their real estate professional, then you need to have the resources for that. So it'll be a much more specific presentation that's geared towards your clients more than likely. But we do have this available for you to use. So we talk everything from different studies that are referenced about why Texas, why North Texas. So this is geared towards someone, whether they're in China or whether they're in LA, anywhere in the world, because right now North Texas is in the spotlight globally when it comes to single family and commercial and multifamily investments. The other thing that drives the market that's important for your investors to know, and this goes for all of your buyers, is these apartment buildings have been built. People talk about overbuilding all these apartments. There's not overbuilding. The apartments are being absorbed. There's been over 30,000 apartments that have been built in the last 3 years here in the DFW. There's more apartments in the pipeline to be built than anywhere else in the nation right now. So what people that are moving into apartments generally are not families. These are young professionals that are moving to the Metroplex for work, all these jobs. Well, what do young people do? They eventually get married, then they have kids. Not all of them are buying as much as they used to. More of them are opting to rent. So that's why single family rental homes are a better investment than they've ever been historically, because there's a lot of people out there that still can't qualify for a mortgage, that want to be in a neighborhood with good schools, and they want to be in a single family home. So we'll continue to see rent increases in single family homes at double digits, much higher than the increases in apartments. There's several reasons for that. One is because you can't build a single family home for less than $220,000 anymore around the Metroplex in a decent area. So the replacement cost, new construction in these areas are $300,000, $350,000. So doesn't it make sense that these homes historically that have sold for $150,000, $180,000 are going to catch up to be closer to $250,000, $280,000 homes, closer to replacement cost? That's what we're seeing in Carrollton, in Richardson, in Plano. Historically, markets that people have just opted to move farther north and buy a newer home and get something newer for the same amount of money. That's changing. That is changing the Metroplex. That's a huge paradigm shift for our market, and it's a shift that we'll continue to see as traffic becomes more of an issue and people want to live closer to work. So that's real important for your investor to understand the fundamentals behind that. So the typical price range of homes purchased between $120,000 and $225,000. We go over some of these. The repairs needed range from $500 to $20,000. Something else that your investors need to understand is that, like I always talk about, speak to the change, what's changing in the market. So some investors have this mentality of all these foreclosures, and they can find a foreclosure and they're going to have to spend $10,000 or $20,000 on repairs. Those days are over. There's no distressed inventory. So a lot of these properties are very clean. They don't really need much work. They may need a make-ready clean and a paint job, and that's about it. So it's totally different than the acquisitions that the investors were buying just 2 years, 3 years ago. So the repairs needed, it's not nearly as much as it used to be. This is just fundamental employment growth projections and where in the Metroplex we're expected to see the growth through 2040, what parts of the metropolitan area, central business districts, Dallas area facts, suggested property criteria. So this is where you need to understand this along with the Waller Group Preferred Investor Services Addendum. So this goes with your buyer representation agreement. And just like any other buyer, these people should be working with a buyer rep agreement and use your investor services addendum. This outlines all the things what the criteria is for that property. And I just updated this with some more recent numbers. We've updated this, last time I had updated it was about 8 months ago. And the time I updated before that was about 6 months before. And the yields keep coming down on the investor returns. Why is that? Why do you think the yields on their cash on cash return is coming down? Prices are going up, right? So you have to think about history repeats itself, right? So what happened in California 10 years ago is what we're seeing happen here. Investors were paying way more for houses than what they could ever get in rent. Why is that? Because Nana just said it, the prices were going up, and they could show a trend that they knew in 6 months or 1 year, they would have positive cash flow if the prices just kept going up and the rents kept going up. Well, we're seeing the same thing here in these lower price points up to about $225,000. These prices, as they move up, then your investors, they just like these hedge funds, the way they buy is they buy based on the trend, where the market's going. So that's your job to inform them how the market's appreciating in these certain submarkets. So we figure the following expenses are factored: 5% vacancy factor, 8% monthly property management fee, 1 month's rent for the lease listing fee, and then the taxes, of course, their insurance, maintenance, a 70% renewal rate for tenant renewing their leases, and then 8% for property appreciation. So they may say, well, we want to be conservative. You know, property appreciation from what we've seen is 6%, but keep in mind, not in this price range. Property appreciation in this price range over the last 2 years has been closer to 12, 15%. So 8% is actually pretty conservative as far as property price appreciation. So make sure you're properly counseling them on how much is the property really appreciating. And that varies based on the price point. So that's a very quick overview on how to consult with your investor. And one of the things that we used to do that I would still suggest doing is, if you have an investor that you think is a candidate for the Waller Group Investor Services, the way that this is successful and the way this works is it's like any other buyer. They have to have very clear expectations up front. So if you don't set the proper expectations up front, then it can be a nightmare. So get me involved. Schedule a conference call with me and your investor, and we can go through this, and you can email this agreement to them. It's a very simple 1.5-page agreement, and then that way they're fully comfortable, and you know upfront what the expectations are before you spend your time sourcing properties. In these lower price points, it's not worth your time unless you know that when you find a property, they're going to buy it. That's the great thing, is that if it meets the criteria, working with an investor, it's about the numbers. So if it meets the criteria, and if you know your numbers, then it should be a done deal, because you're usually competing with owner occupants, and they have mortgages, financing, and your investors many times have a line of credit or cash. And that's another thing that we can help them with, is find that line of credit, or how to leverage some cash or cross-collateralize other assets, so that way that they don't have to have this subject to appraisal and subject to a typical mortgage. Upon execution of this agreement, the client agrees to authorize the Waller Group to submit offers on their behalf, utilize the Waller Group for make-ready services, execute a property management agreement, retaining us as the property manager, and execute the property listing lease agreement, retaining us as the brokerage to lease it. Execute a buyer representation agreement, and provide proof of funds available to purchase with the above criteria. So we outline exactly what criteria: a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, brick in the Metroplex. Maybe they have specific schools that they want in. That's where I need to get involved in that conversation, possibly make sure they have realistic expectations on this. Complete a phone consultation with Logan and the investor specialist upon submission of the above, and then notify the brokerage in writing at any time if client wishes to terminate or change their criteria. Not that different than a typical preferred buyer agreement that we have in our buyer's guide, except this is geared towards investors. This is very, I think it was, I don't know if it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, we were selling about 15 or 18 investment properties a month using this simple 1.5 page agreement. And it worked because people knew their expectations up front. The specialist knew their expectation and the investor knew what they were expected as well. All right, so that is summarized in this PowerPoint presentation. So this is great for groups or any networking groups that you're in or any investment clubs. Then explaining how we have that all under one roof is very attractive. 80% of the consumers prefer one-stop shopping. So our preferred vendors, along with this, to help with that, we have some great preferred vendors to streamline the timelines on the repairs. Also, the hard money lenders, their lines of credit, securing those lines of credit. How do they do that with their bank? If they're a high net worth client, it should be very easy through private banking. It's just a phone call to their banker typically, and they can borrow money for nearly nothing, like 2.25% right now, 2.2%. Are a lot of the credit line, the interest rates for credit lines for private client consumers. So lots of opportunity there. Okay, so that gives you a quick overview. And the other thing that I wanted to emphasize is the CMA training. So to be able to do this and to be empowered to do this, then, and a lot of this applies more for Cathy's training, is knowing your numbers on the CMA. You have to complete the Waller Group CMA training, know the adjustments to make on each property valuation, because before you can meet with the seller and give them an offer on the spot of what your investor would buy or any of our investors would buy, then you have to be able to have a pretty sharp pencil and know what repairs cost. So historically, we have not given, we had a lot of investor leads, people that called us because we had so much REO inventory. So we would send those leads out to our investor specialists that had been trained and qualified on how to do this. And they were not allowed to work with our investors until they had completed all that training and done a few case studies to where I can see their analysis, their before and after numbers and what their projections were, because it's real important to be accurate on those things. Okay, so I'm at about 20 minutes. So we're going to complete this module on the investor services overview, and then we're going to go into the positioning yourself, how to work with investors. But I think we'll do Cathy's in between on how to identify properties, because it really is the most important out of these 3 training modules, is how do you identify these properties for any investor, or 90% of them are going to end up being listed, and you're going to get, in this environment, anything under about 220,000, we know it's like an auction anyway. So might as well get the highest invest for these sellers. Okay, thank you.